Hi, and welcome to Random Rogers Big Picture for the week of July 15th. Two things on the agenda this week. One is a little follow-up kind of example thing with the retirement stuff that we were talking about during the week. And also a little bit of chatter about the new Wisdom Tree Emerging Market Fund, kind of a strategy thing with that one. So first up, retirement stuff. A couple of weeks ago, or maybe longer, we got a thing in the mail to register our car. It's up for registration. And along with it was this handy little bit about getting a Diamondbacks license plate. This is Arizona after all, and the Diamondbacks are our team. I'm a Diamondbacks fan. The cost is pretty nominal. It looks like it's $25 initial application fee and then $25 annual renewal. So the cost is quite inconsequential. But I think it speaks to a spending pattern or spending habit. When you add up a bunch of things that by themselves cost nothing, well, next thing you know, you've spent a lot of money. There's a balance here between, buying nothing and, just living in a cold, dark apartment versus, getting everything you want, everything you see, coming home with some little toy or trinket all day long. Everybody buys, more crap than they should, and that's just human nature. But you don't have to buy so much. A little bit of discipline, and it spills over into kind of the other things we were talking about, how you travel, how you spend money on a house, how you spend money on a car, on and on and on. Maybe the balance is picking your indulgences as opposed to not indulging in every last thing, kind of all things in moderation, with the big macro being, as a behavior pattern, establishing a little bit of discipline with some of the decisions you make that will ultimately work its way into all spending and ultimately can have an impact. I think it can have an impact, a big impact, on how you retire and whether or not you're trying to squeeze out 8% out of a portfolio as opposed to something a little safer. I realize my opinions here are quite skewed to the not spending side. I kind of have peculiar things about that, aka I'm cheap, but not as cheap as some others I know. Anywho, moving on to the new Wisdom Tree Emerging Market Fund. I mentioned it. It's gotten a lot of mention here, there, and everywhere. After some sort of a glitch, it started trading at some point in the middle of the day on Friday. To be clear, the ticker is DEM. The yield on the index page, it says the dividend yield is 6.23%. So you have to subtract out the 63 basis point, and I guess that makes it a 560 yield as opposed to over 6%. 560 is still fantastic, to be sure. The fund itself is heavier in certain things like materials and lighter in certain things like financials, which is kind of interesting. Every emerging market, and I'm overgeneralizing, every emerging market has a big bank that's public, so it seems like a logical destination, or a logical place to allocate money to, but it's got a low weighting at only 13%. Some of the country weightings are a little interesting, specifically Thailand at 8.25%, and Malaysia at 6.95%. These are by far the largest weightings that I've seen in a broad-based product for these two countries. EM has almost nothing, and I'm not sure about the others other than much, much smaller. I think that the GMM, which is the State Street product, they have something like 3% in Thailand and something similar in Malaysia. They also have a little bit in Poland, 2.5%, which is actually not that unusual, but there you have it. Heavily weighted to Israel at 5.89%. Israel is a pretty high-yielding country. I've got one stock that I own for one person because I perceive it as volatile, that has an enormous yield. So there is a lot of yield to be had in Israel. As far as the back testing, looks pretty good. And looking at the page here, 1 year it outperformed EEM by about 6%. Another year, or 3 years annualized, by about 2%. 5 years annualized by about 4.5%. I saw on the Index Universe write-up of this that it lagged EEM for 5 years. That doesn't correspond with what I'm looking at here. I'll put an image of the backtest as I see it on the screen underneath the video. You can see what I mean. 10 years, average annualized beat is almost 6%. Pretty effective. Pretty good tool looking backwards. Who knows what it'll do going forward, but you know, the Wisdom Tree products have a decent track record, a little more than 50% in this first year, beat their benchmark. I don't think there's a need to jump out and own this thing tomorrow, but if after 6 months this outperformed, the one broad-based emerging market I use for some people, and I own it as well, is ADRE, which is now a PowerShares product. If it could show me a few months of outperformance along with, you know, the dividend yield for ADRE is no slouch. It's over 3%. But if it can do pretty well here, I'd be inclined to be a buyer, but not before 6 months comes and goes. One strategic point that I would make, though, and this is kind of a recurring theme, but there's a couple of gaps here. One gap that I notice, that's a stock that's missing that I'm partial to, is a CVRD from Brazil. It gets everyone who cares about emerging markets that I've ever read knows about this stock. It's been mentioned 2 or 3 years running in Barron's annual roundtable. I think it's Felix Zulauf who picks it every year. I've owned it for a long time. I think I first bought it in 2003 for my, you know, the first few clients that I was managing money for. It's not in here. If it is, let me put it this way: if it is, it has less than a 1% weight. I'm, you know, convinced that it's a great stock, but you need to do your own diligence. But pairing something like a broad-based product like DEM, you know, if you think of emerging markets equal weight at 7 to 8%, maybe you put 5 or 6% into a broad-based product if you're not, you know, real gung-ho in being a stock picker, and then maybe you put the remaining 2% into some sort of stock that fills a gap in a particular fund. And this is probably the only emerging market fund where CVRD isn't one of the largest holdings. So it's just an example, a way to add a little bit of outperformance above and beyond. If you put 2% in CVRD, something I say all the time, and it goes to 0 without you doing anything, well, it's a bit of a bummer, but it's not catastrophic, clearly. But just a bit of a strategic point, kind of mixing together different products is something I write about all the time, and there's an example. All right, that's about it. See, baseball Freeview on DirecTV. Enjoy the baseball.